Hello everyone, my name is Cosmic and you're watching my review of Cyberpunk 2077. It's been almost 2 weeks since this game was released and it has been one hell of a ride for people who are excited for the game and for its developers. In my opinion, this has got to be one of the most disastrous launches in video game history. At this point, I'm pretty sure everyone has already seen and heard about the plethora of bugs and glitches that plagued Cyberpunk 2077. I myself have come across small annoying ones such as my character's hair disappearing in the mirror whenever I put on a hat, and game-breaking ones such as being stuck in objects and having to load an earlier save. I'm pretty certain that all of these issues can and will be patched out by CDPR in the many months to come, so it's not too big of a deal for me. I'm accustomed to janky games that have a rough beginning. In fact, some of my favorite games are buggy messes such as Fallout New Vegas and Alpha Protocol. However, the game has bigger issues than its technical problems. Before we get into that, let me just talk about what I liked about Cyberpunk 2077. First of all, the graphics. This is a beautiful game. There's no doubt about that. Of course, you have to play it on a decent computer and absolutely avoid the PS4 and Xbox One ports. But when you have it running on optimized settings, even without ray tracing, this game is very good looking. The textures such as clothing and cybernetic implants on the various characters, both major and minor, are realistic and great to look at. The city, with its almost nauseating amount of neon light, successfully nails that futuristic cyberpunk city vibe that we've been expecting from a game like this. When visual glitches such as animations not loading, characters and objects floating, and so on are not popping up everywhere, Cyberpunk 2077 becomes an immersive experience that is both unique and praiseworthy. Alright, on to the second thing that I like, which is the script and the voice acting along with it. One thing that a lot of people are disappointed with Cyberpunk 2077 is the lack of its RPG elements, especially in the main storyline, and I'll get to that soon. I believe these criticisms are completely warranted. But if you've played The Witcher 3, then you'll completely understand the dialogue system in this game. Basically, you're given one or two choices highlighted in yellow, which will progress the dialogue, and a few other choices highlighted in blue that just fleshes out the conversation topic. Unlike many people out there, I did not buy into the Cyberpunk hype. So I went into this game with very little expectations, and once I got a good grasp of how simplified the systems are, compared to most RPGs, I actually started enjoying the game a lot more. My idea of the game went from open world cyberpunk RPG to The Witcher 3 in a cyberpunk setting very early on, and that allowed me to approach the game in a different way. The linear dialogue choices and quest structure were still a tad bit disappointing, but much more tolerable with this mindset. With my RPG expectations out of the way, I was able to start appreciating the script and voice acting in this game. Despite the underwhelming story, which I'll get to later, I found that everyone did a good job voicing their characters, and there were a lot of memorable lines, especially from Johnny Silverhand. Now, I've seen some people say that Keanu Reeves' voice acting as Johnny is bad or emotionless, but for me, I was fine with it. I mean, I've always known Keanu as someone who plays movie characters with a very little emotional range, so seeing him constantly pissed off and bitter as Johnny was pretty refreshing and fun. And I found myself growing fond of characters like Jackie, Judy, Panam, Victor, and many others. Most of them were one-dimensional, but it never felt like they overstayed their welcome. There were some parts where I genuinely felt sad or happy for these characters. Some of the moments where we just sit down and chill with them actually felt relaxing for me. I just wish that they were given more fleshed out personalities, more varied life perspectives, but this is all we got and I'm pretty much fine with it. And pretty much those two are the only things I liked about this game. Let's get on to things I didn't like, and there's a lot of things I didn't like. The number one thing that I didn't like about Cyberpunk 2077 is the lack of AI for many of its elements. Look, nobody can convince me this is actually like a good game, underneath all the bugs, because I've played almost 60 hours of this game and my experience has been pretty okay in terms of encountering bugs. Like I've not had that big of a problem with the bugs and glitches that people are mentioning online. I've had a pretty smooth experience. However, I still couldn't find what someone would call a good game underneath it all. This is a game where you're not where when you're not talking to people, you're shooting them. And it's not a lot of fun when the enemies have brain dead AI. Look, regardless of the difficulty setting, enemies will never flank you. They rarely run away from grenades, and they just wait behind cover. So you're just waiting for you to run up to them and shotgun them in the face. It's just so mindless and not in a fun way. It also doesn't help that enemies are bullet sponges, especially in difficulties above normal. I've had enemies who are supposed to be on the same level as I am take more than 5 headshots to kill. Look, I don't like bullet sponge enemies, even when I'm playing a looter shooter like Borderlands or Destiny, so it feels even more out of place for a game like Cyberpunk. It gets worse because the game has some kind of wanted system like in GTA, where the cops will want to take you down if you hurt civilians. But the problem is there is no police AI. Cops will literally teleport and spawn behind you whenever you commit a crime. There is no such thing as cops arriving by car because there's actually no driving AI for the police. So whenever I run over someone or outright shoot them in the face, I just have to drive a few miles away and poof, the police are gone. I'm so baffled at how unfinished this game is. This lack of AI can also be found in the civilian NPCs around you. Pedestrians literally pop in and out of existence beyond a certain distance, and lots of time I've seen pedestrians straight up disappear the moment I look in a different direction. It's just as bad when it comes to driving. If I park my vehicle in the middle of the road, which I often do because I've got places to be, I'll find a huge traffic congestion behind my car when I come back to it. The AI has no idea how to swerve around a vehicle or just ram into one if they grow impatient. They will just wait there patiently until I move my vehicle. Hell, I've had situations where they don't even move after I decide to drive away, which probably means their basic AI has ceased to function. Again, I'm convinced that CDPR can fix a bunch of the minor bugs, but is it really possible to completely revamp or significantly improve the AI systems in the game through patches? Well, for the sake of CDPR and everyone who wants to enjoy this game, I hope so. As of making this video, the game is at version 1.05 and most of the footage you're seeing in this video I recorded during version 1.04 was out. And to me, right now, this game is just not worth a full price purchase. Alright, on to the second thing I dislike, which is the lack of RPG elements. Now I know I mentioned before that I came into this game with very little expectations, but CDPR themselves marketed this game for many years as an RPG, an open world RPG. But I'm aware of the fact that they changed it at the last minute, but we'll get back to that later. Okay, so I mentioned before that this game has a very bare bones dialogue system. And I mean, the moment they announced that the main character V would have a voice, it was enough to convince me this wouldn't be a good RPG, because most of the RPGs that I like, they have a silent protagonist, which often gives the player a lot more freedom to make choices, and it saves money for the studio to not have to hire a voice actor. So after many hours of playing this game, I realized that a lot of the choices I made didn't actually matter, and I was fine with that because I decided to change my approach to the game. But it's still pretty disappointing if you come into this game expecting an RPG. So like the only time I really felt that my actions and dialogue choices had consequences was in the very last few missions of the story quest line. So it was kind of like a Mass Effect 3 situation, which, is not a very good situation for any RPG. So basically, most of the dialogue choices can be boiled down to 4 types of responses, which are number 1, yes, number 2, Yes, but with corpo, nomad, or street kid flavoring. Number 3, yes, but with a stat check, either through intelligence, body, or hacking. Can be either one of those. Or number 4, no. That's it. You either say yes in 3 different ways, which are very boring, or you just say no. Remember how I said I had very little expectations with this game because I didn't buy into the hype? Well, like I said, that little amount of expectation came from the RPG promise of the game. And one of the promises when it comes to the RPG aspect is the life paths. So the life paths are basically your origin story for your main character. And you can choose between starting out as a nomad, a street kid, or a corpo. And in my playthrough, I've played 1.5 playthroughs now. I finished my first playthrough as a corpo, and I'm currently halfway through a nomad playthrough. And I'm so disappointed to find that the life paths only decide 2 things in your playthrough. Well, 2 major things. Number 1 being your introduction quest, which is the first quest you ever do in the game that, fleshes out your life path. And second are the dialogue choices with the life path flavoring that I mentioned earlier. So that's it. Those are the only 2 major differences that ever occur when you change life paths. So what happens basically is that you don't stick to your life path throughout the game, because right after finishing the introductory quest for any life path, the game plays a short montage that shows you and Jackie, your new friend, get into wacky situations as mercenaries in Night City. So regardless of what life path you chose, the game will just force you to just become another merc in Night City. If you thought you were going to go on like intriguing mega corporation missions and potentially climb up the mega corporate ladder playing corpo, well, you thought wrong. I believe CDPR themselves saw this criticism coming from a lot of people, because at one point before the game's release, like I mentioned, they actually changed the description of the game from open world RPG to open world action adventure game. This means that they probably knew they didn't have enough time to make a proper RPG, so they had to try to adjust people's expectations. But it was definitely too late in the development period, because there are obvious leftovers from systems of an RPG game, such as the stat checks and the different ways of playing the game. I'm assuming all of it had to be left in there in a half-baked state due to time constraints. Okay, now for the third and final thing I disliked about Cyberpunk 2077, the non-replayability or lack of replay value. So based on what I said regarding the lack of gameplay differences in the 3 life paths, I think it's pretty easy to see why this game lacks replay value. I realized this in its full sadness and frustration on my second playthrough, where I chose the Nomad life path instead of the Corpo one, and I also decided to keep choosing different dialogue options compared to my first playthrough. The thing is, almost everything went exactly the same. And that's not the worst part. The worst part is that the game takes a really long time to actually start. So you start the game after the introductory mission and the montage, you start at Act 1. And Act 1 of the game is spread across a few main quests, which involve a lot of non-combat sections, a lot of talking. And the choices you make in these dialogue sections don't really change anything, and it gets worse because the open world isn't fully open until you finish Act 1. See, this makes replaying the game to try out different life paths and choices very frustrating. But now I've realized that the choices don't really create different outcomes, so I guess there is really no point in second or third playthroughs. With that in mind, Cyberpunk 2077 can be considered a linear game that takes around just a day or two to beat the main quest, and maybe you can add another 30 to 40 hours to clear out the side quests, which only some are interesting, of course. Now, similar to the main quest, side quests are usually only tackled in 1 or 2 ways, but almost always conclude in the same manner. I don't really consider this a weak point because I don't consider Cyberpunk 2077 an RPG anymore, but it is something you should take note of if you're still going to approach this game as an RPG. So aside from those three things, there are other elements of the game that I disliked, but they're all very minor in comparison. For example, the limited character customization options, the lack of an option to dress your character up without worrying about armor rating, the horrible phone and messaging UI, and a few other things. In short, Cyberpunk 2077 wasn't a huge disappointment for me because I didn't really have high expectations for it, but I know it definitely is a huge disappointment for a lot of people out there, especially those who have been following the game's development for the many years that it has been announced and built up. Now, I'm not very familiar with all the promises that CDPR made along the way, but I think it's safe for me to say that the final product is just very bare bones compared to what was promised. Let this game be a lesson to everyone out there who still believes in the practice of pre-ordering games. My advice is stop pre-ordering games. I've never pre-ordered games myself, and to this day, I fail to see why people do it. Unless you have an infinite amount of money to burn, it's always better to just wait for the game to come out and make your purchase based on the final product and not the marketing of the product that is a work in progress. I want to end this review by saying that I truly believe Cyberpunk 2077 will eventually become a decent game when all of its technical issues are fixed. Maybe years later, this game will become something along the levels of Fallout New Vegas, because I can definitely see it being sold like in the way that The Witcher 3 became successful, because a lot of people got into games like The Witcher 3 and Fallout New Vegas when they had like their Game of the Year or Definitive Edition bundles coming out, where you got the games for a cheaper price, but together with all the extra content and DLC. And a lot of people love them because they're very good for value, they're very fun to play, and it's the same for me. That's how I got into The Witcher 3 and Fallout New Vegas as well. So I'm certain that people who will eventually end up buying this game years later, when it reaches a more stable and a more improved state, will be very satisfied with this game. But if you're thinking of buying it now, I would say just wait, just be patient. If you haven't bought it yet, do not buy this game. I think it's just not worth the full price. And you can see this because a lot of people on PS4 and Xbox One are refunding the game. So just be patient and wait for the game to get fixed, or get it on PC. If you really want to play this game, get it on PC, but set your expectations low. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this game. Thank you again for watching this video. If you guys liked the review, please do click on that like button. And if you want to see more videos like this, which I will definitely be producing, please subscribe to my channel. All right, thank you and goodbye.